Chapter 1. The Science of Deduction.
It was afternoon. Holmes and I were sitting in our living room in 221B Baker Street, relaxing after our lunch.
"I hate to be bored,"
said Holmes suddenly. I looked over at him. "Are you bored now?" I asked. I myself was feeling rather content.
"Yes,"
he replied.
"I need something to occupy my mind. That's why I have chosen my particular profession, or rather, created it, as I'm the only one in the world."
"The only unofficial detective?" I asked.
"The only unofficial consulting detective,"
he corrected me.
"When Gregson or Lestrade or Athelney Jones don't know what to do, which they normally don't, then they come to me. I give them an expert opinion. I take no credit for it. It's the work itself which gives me pleasure. But there is no work at the moment, so I am bored."
I had some experience of Holmes's work in the Jefferson Hope case. I had written a small book about the case, calling it A Study in Scarlet. Sherlock Holmes did not like it. He said it was too romantic.
"My name has also extended to the continent,"
continued Holmes.
"I was consulted last week by a French detective. He had 2 out of the 3 qualities necessary for a good detective. He has the power of observation and of deduction. He doesn't have knowledge, but that will come with experience."
"But aren't observation and deduction the same thing?" I asked.
"Oh, no,"
he answered.
"For example, observation tells me that you have been to the Wigmore Street post office this morning, but deduction tells me that when you were there, you sent a telegram."
"You're right!" I exclaimed. "But how did you know?"
"It's quite simple,"
he laughed.
"I can observe that you have some red-coloured earth on your shoe. That's observation. Just opposite the Wigmore Street post office, they are digging up the road. The earth they have dug up is the same colour, which can't be found anywhere else in the area. That is deduction."
"And what about the telegram?"
"I knew you hadn't written a letter, because I was with you all morning. I also saw that you already have stamps and envelopes. So that only leaves one reason to go to the post office: to send a telegram."
"How simple," I replied. "Can you put your skills to a more difficult test?"
"Of course,"
said Holmes.
"What is it?"
I gave him a watch that I had had for only a short time. "What can you tell me about the character or habits of the late owner of this watch?" I asked. Secretly, I wanted him to get it wrong. Sometimes his know-it-all tone became annoying. He looked at the watch for some time, opening the back and examining it carefully. He handed it back to me.
"It has recently been cleaned,"
he said,
"which has taken away many clues."
"You're right," I said. I did not think this was a very good excuse.
"But I can say," he continued, "that this watch belonged to your elder brother, who inherited it from your father."
"Ah, the initials H.W. on the back. Right so far. Anything else?" I asked.
"Your brother was an untidy man and very careless. He was poor for a lot of the time, with occasional times when he had money. He finally began drinking heavily, and he died. That's all I can tell."
I felt disappointed and angry. How could he tell all that from a watch? It was all true, but I was sure that he had found out about my poor, unhappy brother from other people. "You're very unkind," I said to him. "Don't pretend to deduce what you have been told by others."
"Dear Dr. Watson, I'm sorry,"
he said.
"I forgot how personal and upsetting it might be to you. But I promise that I didn't even know you had a brother until you gave me that watch."
"Then how did you know these facts? You were right about everything." Holmes told me.
"In England, When pawnbrokers take a watch, they scratch the number of the ticket on the watch with a pin. I noticed that there were 4 small numbers scratched onto the back of the watch. This means that your brother often didn't have much money, so he took the watch to a pawnbroker's 4 times. But then he also often had enough money to buy it back. Also, if you look at where you wind up the watch, you'll see many little scratches. This is where the key for winding it up has slipped. It slipped because he was often drunk when he went to bed and was trying to wind up his watch.
There was a knock at the door.
"There's a young lady to see you, sir,"
Said our landlady.
"a Miss Mary Marston."
Said Holmes.
I don't know the name. Show her in. You stay as well, Doctor.
Miss Marston entered the room. She was a young, attractive lady with blonde hair and large blue eyes. She seemed agitated.
"I've come to ask for your help, Mr. Holmes,"
She said.
"because you once helped my employer, Mrs. Cecil Forrester, with a small problem. She recommended you."
Yes, I think I remember.
Said Holmes.
A very simple case.
"She didn't think so. But you can't say the same about my case. Let me tell you about my strange situation."
Sherlock Holmes looked excited.
Tell me all about it.
He said.
Listening activity.
Hello, Mrs. Smith. What a pleasure to see you again.
Hello, Mr. James. I'm afraid I'm not so happy to be here again myself.
Never mind, Mrs. Smith. I'm sure I can give you enough money to help you with your rent, just until your husband has a job again. I still have your diamond ring, remember? I haven't sold it yet.
Thank you. It belonged to my grandmother. I'd like to get it back one day.
Of course, if you have the money, that is. I need to eat too, you know. Now, what have you got for me?
I have this gold bracelet. My son found it in an old chest.
Did he now? Well, let's have a look. It's not worth much, I'm afraid. Very poor quality of gold. Still, he is lucky to have found it. I'll give you £5 for it. And this is your pearl necklace.
Yes, Mr. James. It was a birthday present from my husband.
Well, it's very pretty, but I'm sorry to tell you this, Mrs. Smith, but I don't think these pearls are real.
Chapter 2. A New Case.
I got up to leave, but the young lady stopped me.
You may also be able to help me.
She said. I sat down again.
These are the facts.
She continued.
My father was an officer in an Indian regiment. My mother was dead, so I went to boarding school in Edinburgh until I was 17. In the year 1878, my father had a year's leave from the military and he came home. He wrote to me and told me to meet him in London at the Langham Hotel. When I arrived, they told me that he was staying there but had gone out the night before and hadn't returned. I waited all day, but there was no news. Eventually, I contacted the police. But from that day to this, nothing has been heard of my father.
The poor girl was trying not to cry.
What was the date?
Asked Holmes.
He disappeared on the 3rd of December, 1878. Nearly 10 years ago.
Did he have any bags?
Yes, but there was nothing in them that gave any clue about what had happened. Clothes, books, some things from the Andaman Islands. That was where he was based.
She explained.
Did he have any friends in town?
Asked Holmes.
Only one.
She replied.
Major Sholto, who was in the same regiment as my father. He was retired and lived in Upper Norwood. He didn't even know that my father was in England.
She continued.
About 6 years ago, on the 4th of May, 1882, I saw an advertisement in the Times newspaper asking for the address of Miss Mary Marston. It said that she would receive good news if she communicated her address. So I put it in the newspaper. The next day, a small box was brought to my house. Inside, there was a very large and beautiful pearl. There was nothing else. No message, no address, nothing. Since then, on the same date every year, another box has arrived, each containing another pearl.
She opened a small box as she was speaking. Inside were 6 beautiful pearls.
Most interesting,
said Holmes.
Has anything else happened?
Yes, today. That's why I've come to see you. This morning I received this letter.
She gave the letter to Holmes for him to read.
Be outside the Lyceum Theatre tonight at 7 o'clock,
he read.
If you feel safer, bring 2 friends. You deserve justice and you shall have it. Do not bring the police, your unknown friend. Well, what a mystery. And what do you want to do, Miss Marston?
He asked.
That's why I'm here,
she said.
We will go then. You and I, and, yes, Dr. Watson can come too. We have worked together before.
Miss Marston looked at me.
Will you come, Doctor?
She asked. I'll be happy to, I replied.
You're both very kind,
she said.
I'll be here at 6 then.
One last thing,
said Holmes.
The handwriting in the letter, is it the same as that on the pearl boxes?
I have them here,
she said, giving them to Holmes. He spread them out on the table and compared them.
Yes,
he said after a moment.
The writer has tried to change his handwriting each time, but they are definitely written by the same person. Is this handwriting anything like your father's, Miss Marston?
Not at all,
she said.
I thought so,
said Holmes.
We'll see you at 6 then.
Miss Marston left the room. I looked out of the window and watched her walking away. What an attractive woman! I exclaimed, turning to Holmes.
Is she?
He said.
I didn't notice.
Holmes got up.
I'm going out,
he said.
There are a few things I want to find out.
I sat at the window. I could not stop thinking about Miss Mary Marston. Her smile, the sound of her voice, and the mystery that was part of her life. If she was 17 when her father disappeared, that must make her 27 now, I thought. A nice age. I sat thinking about her until my thoughts became dangerous. Who was I to hope for such things? A retired and injured army surgeon with little money. No, it was better to forget such thoughts of happiness with Miss Marston. Holmes returned at 5:30. He seemed very happy.
This isn't such a great mystery,
he said.
There seems to be only one explanation.
What? You've solved it already? I asked.
Oh, no,
he said.
But I have discovered an important fact. I've been looking at old copies of the Times, and I found out that Major Sholto died on the 28th of April, 1882.
And so? I'm sorry, I don't understand, Holmes.
No? You do surprise me. Look at it this way. Captain Marston disappears. The only person he knows in London is Major Sholto. Major Sholto says he didn't know Marston was in London. 4 years later, Major Sholto dies. Only a week after his death, Captain Marston's daughter receives a valuable present, which is repeated every year. Now she gets a letter which says that she deserves justice. What else can it mean except justice for the loss of her father? Why did the presents begin immediately after Sholto's death? It must mean that Sholto's heir knows something about the mystery and wants to compensate Mary Marston.
But how strange! Why has he written now, and not 6 years ago? And anyway, what justice can she have? You don't really think her father is still alive, do you? What other injustice is there in her case? Sherlock Holmes thought for a moment.
It's true, Watson, there are problems. But I think our journey tonight will solve them all. Are you ready? I think Miss Marston is downstairs in a cab.
I picked up my hat and my stick. Holmes took a gun from a drawer and put it in his pocket. It seemed that things might get serious. In the cab, Sherlock Holmes asked Miss Marston some more questions.
Major Sholto was a very good friend of Papa's,
She said.
He and Papa were in charge of the soldiers on the Andaman Islands. They spent a lot of time together. By the way,
She continued,
a strange paper was found in Papa's desk. No one can understand it, but I brought it to show you. Here it is.
Holmes studied the paper carefully.
It was made in India.
He said,
It is a plan of a large building with many rooms and passages. In one place there is a small cross in red ink, and above it is written 3.37 from left. In the left-hand corner is a strange hieroglyph, like 4 crosses in a line with their arms touching. Beside it is written, The Sign of the Four. Jonathan Small, Mahomet Singh, Abdullah Khan, Dost Akbar. Now, I don't know what this is about, but it is obviously an important document, because it has been kept very carefully. It is very clean.
Holmes leaned back. He was thinking hard.
Chapter 3. The Story of the Bald-Headed Man.
We arrived at the Lyceum Theatre. There were already a lot of people outside. We got out of the cab, and a small man came up to us.
Are you with Miss Marston?
He asked us.
I'm Miss Marston, and these 2 gentlemen are my friends.
She said.
Can you promise that neither of your friends is a policeman?
He asked. Miss Marston promised. The man took us to a cab. We climbed inside, and the man drove the cab. We moved away quickly through the streets. At first I knew where we were going, but I was soon lost. Holmes, of course, knew exactly where we were.
Priory Road, Robert Street, Cold Harbour Lane. Not very nice areas,
He said. Finally, the cab stopped outside a house in a row of other houses. They all looked empty. We knocked at the door, and it was opened by an Indian servant.
He is waiting for you.
He said. We heard another voice from a room further inside.
Bring them in.
It said.
Bring them straight in.
The servant took us to a door and opened it. In the room was a small man with a bald head. He had a hanging lower lip, which showed a line of irregular yellow teeth. Although he was bald, he did not look old. He was, in fact, 30 years old.
Come in,
He said. He seemed nervous. The room was very different to the rest of the house and the area. It was brightly coloured and luxurious, in an oriental style.
My name is Thaddeus Sholto,
The man said.
You are Miss Marston, and these gentlemen?
Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson.
So, to begin,
He said.
your father, Miss Marston, is dead.
She went white, but then said,
I had hoped he was still alive, but I knew in my heart that he wasn't.
Thaddeus Sholto continued.
I can tell you everything, and I can also give you justice, whatever my brother Bartholomew says. We'll have to go to Norwood to see him, but he's very angry with me for doing what I think is right. He can be a terrible person when he's angry.
Let's go as soon as possible, then. It's already late, I said.
First of all, I must tell you what I know,
He said.
My father was Major John Sholto. He retired 11 years ago and came to live at Pondicherry House in Norwood. He was a rich man and brought Indian servants with him and lived in luxury. My twin brother Bartholomew and I were the only children. I remember when Captain Marston disappeared. We talked about it often with my father. We never suspected that he knew exactly what happened to Captain Marston. We did know that our father was in some sort of danger, though. He did not go out alone, and he was very scared of men with wooden legs. Once, he even fired his gun at a man with a wooden leg, who was just a salesman trying to sell something. We had to pay him a lot of money to keep the matter quiet. In 1882, he received a letter from India, which was a great shock to him. He never told us what it said, but from that day he became ill, until the doctor told us he was close to death. He wanted to tell us something before he died. When we went in to see him, he looked terrible. He told us to lock the door and come to either side of the bed. This is what he said. I have treated Marston's daughter terribly. I have been a greedy man. At least half of the treasure belongs to her. See that string of pearls there? That is part of the treasure. I was going to send it to her. You, my sons, I want you to make sure that she gets half of the Agra treasure. But don't send anything until I am dead. I'll tell you how Marston died, he continued. For many years he had a weak heart, but only I knew about it. When we were in India, by luck, he and I found a large amount of valuable treasure. I brought it over to England. When Marston arrived in London, he came to claim his share. We argued about how to divide the treasure between us. We were shouting at each other, and he was very angry. Suddenly, he put his hand to his side. His face changed colour, and he fell backwards, hitting his head on the treasure chest. He was dead. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to call the police, because it looked like I had killed him, and I didn't want other people to know about the treasure. I was thinking about it when my servant came to the door. "Don't worry, sir," he said. "I won't tell anyone that you killed him. We'll hide the body, and nobody will know anything." I made a decision. If my own servant thought that I killed him, then the police were certainly not going to believe me. So we hid Marston's body and the treasure. It is only right that Marston's daughter gets her share. Come closer, and I'll tell you where it is. The treasure is hidden in... At this moment, his face changed. He looked scared, and he began to shout, "Keep him out! Keep him out!" We looked around at the window behind us where he was staring. There was a face looking in from the darkness. It was a bearded face with wild, cruel eyes and an evil expression. We rushed to the window, but there was no one there. When we returned to our father, his heart had stopped beating. We searched the garden that night, but all we found was a single footprint below the window. We thought we had imagined it, but the next day the window of my father's room was found open. Someone had searched his room, and on his chest was a note with the words, "The Sign of the Four," written on it. We never knew who it was, or what it meant. Nothing was stolen.
He stopped speaking for a moment. Miss Marston looked white, and she drank the glass of water I gave her. Sherlock Holmes leaned back in his chair. Thaddeus continued his story.
My brother and I wanted to find the treasure that our father told us about. We searched everywhere, digging in the garden, looking in every part of the house. But we didn't find it. We knew by the quality of the pearls that the treasure was worth a lot of money. My brother is very like my father. He is also very greedy, and he didn't want to send the pearls to Miss Marston. But finally I persuaded him to send a pearl once a year to Miss Marston, so that she had something of value.
"It was very kind of you,"
said Miss Marston.
We had to make sure justice was done.
Said Thaddeus.
At least, that's what I thought. Bartholomew didn't agree. That's why I moved out of Pondicherry House.
So why are we here now?
asked Holmes.
Yesterday, I found out that the treasure has been discovered. I contacted Miss Marston, and now we must go to Norwood and claim our share of it. I told Bartholomew what I wanted to do, so he'll be expecting us, even if he doesn't want to see us.
You've done well, sir,
said Holmes.
Let's go.
Chapter 4. Murder at Pondicherry House.
The cab was waiting for us. On the journey to Norwood, Thaddeus told us how Bartholomew had found out where the treasure was. He had worked out the area of the house and realized that there was a space at the top of the house. He made a hole in the ceiling which led to this space, and there was the treasure chest. He lowered it down through the hole into the room below.
He thinks that the jewels are worth about £500,000,
said Thaddeus. We looked at each other. This meant that Miss Marston was rich. I am ashamed to say that I did not feel so glad. A poor doctor marrying an heiress was definitely out of the question. It was nearly 11 o'clock when the cab stopped and we got out.
This is Pondicherry House, Miss Marston,
said Thaddeus. The house had a lot of land around it, which was all surrounded by a high stone wall. We waited at the gate.
Who's there?
asked a voice from inside.
McMurdo, it's me, Thaddeus. Let us in.
The gate opened. McMurdo looked strong.
Who are these people?
he asked.
I can't let them in, sir. I don't know them.
Sherlock Holmes stepped forward.
I think you do, McMurdo. Do you remember that amateur boxer who fought with you a few years back?
Not Mr. Sherlock Holmes,
cried McMurdo.
Of course I remember you. Well, come on in. Sorry, Mr. Thaddeus, but I had my orders.
We followed Thaddeus up the path to the house.
There's no light in Bartholomew's room,
said Thaddeus.
How strange. He knows we're coming.
There's a light in that window there,
said Holmes, pointing.
That's where Mrs. Bernstone, the housekeeper, is,
said Thaddeus.
I'll go in and speak to her. Wait here a moment.
We saw the door open and heard Mrs. Bernstone crying.
Oh, Mr. Thaddeus! I'm so glad you're here!
We waited outside. Miss Marston and I stood together. She put her hand in mine. What a wonderful thing love is! We had met only that day, but it seemed so natural to be standing there with her, hand in hand. Suddenly, the door opened, and Thaddeus came running out.
There's something wrong with Bartholomew,
he cried.
I'm so scared.
Come into the house,
said Holmes, taking control of the situation. We followed him in.
Mr. Bartholomew has locked himself in his room and won't answer me,
the housekeeper explained.
I went up and looked through the keyhole. You must look for yourselves. I've never seen him look like that before.
Holmes went upstairs. I followed, but Miss Marston stayed with the frightened housekeeper. We arrived at the door to Bartholomew's room. Holmes knocked. There was no reply. Then he tried to open it, but it was locked from the inside. He bent down to look through the keyhole. He stood up again instantly, looking shocked.
Have a look, Watson,
he said.
What do you think?
I looked through, then stepped back in horror. In the moonlight, I saw a face, the very same face as Thaddeus with the same bald head. But there was a horrible smile on his face. I turned to make sure Thaddeus was still with us. Then I remembered that he and his brother were twins. This is terrible, I said to Holmes. What do we do?
We must break down the door,
he replied. We broke down the door and went into the room. It looked like a laboratory. There were some large containers. One of them was on its side, and a small stream of dark liquid came from it. It smelt very strong, like tar. In the middle of the room were some steps. Above them was a hole in the ceiling, big enough for a man to get through. At the bottom of the steps was a rope. Bartholomew Sholto was in the chair. He was stiff and cold, and had obviously been dead for many hours. On the table was a note. Holmes picked it up.
You see?
He said, giving it to me. It read, "The sign of the four." "What does it mean?" I asked him.
It means murder,
He said.
Look here.
He pointed to a long, thin dart stuck in the skin of the dead man, just above his ear.
Take it out,
He said to me.
but be careful. It's poisoned.
I took it out carefully. It was long, sharp, and black. It looked like a thorn, but not from any tree in England. I don't understand. It becomes more complicated at every step. Holmes disagreed.
It becomes clearer every minute. I just need a few missing clues.
He said. We had almost forgotten about Thaddeus since we entered the room. Suddenly, he spoke.
The treasure has gone!
He cried.
They've taken the treasure! I helped him to bring it down through that hole last night. I was the last person to see him. I heard him lock the door behind me.
What time was that?
Asked Holmes.
About 10 o'clock. And now he's dead, and the police will think I killed him. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. You do believe me, don't you? I think I'm going mad.
Holmes put his hand on his shoulder.
Don't worry, Mr. Sholto.
He said kindly.
Go to the police station. Say you'll help them in any way you can. We'll wait here for you.
Chapter 5. Holmes gets to work.
Now, Watson,
Said Holmes.
we've got half an hour to find out what happened. So, how did these people come and go? The door hasn't been opened since last night. Let's look at the window. The window is locked on the inside. Let's open it. Nothing to climb up. The roof is too far away. But a man did come in by the window last night. Here's a footprint. And here is a round muddy mark. And here by the table. See, Watson? It all becomes clear.
I looked at the round marks. That's not a footprint, I said.
No, it's the mark made by a wooden leg.
He said. The wooden-legged man.
Exactly. But there has been someone else here, a very efficient partner. Look out of the window. Is it possible to climb that wall, Watson?
I looked out. Impossible, I said. It's 60 feet, and there's nowhere to stand.
Without help, it's impossible. But if there was someone in this room who drops a rope down from the window, like that rope over there, then I think even a wooden-legged man could climb up. Then he can leave the same way, and the person in the room simply pulls the rope up, closes and locks the window. He gets out the same way he came in. Look at the end of the rope. There are marks of blood on it where the wooden-legged man took the skin from his hands when he went down.
Yes, but what about this mysterious partner? I asked. How did he get into the room? The door is locked, and you can't get to the window without help. Did he come down the chimney?
No,
Said Holmes.
it's too small. I'd already thought of that.
Well, how then?
Think, Watson. He didn't come through the door, the window, or the chimney. There's nowhere for him to hide in the room. So what's left?
He came through the hole in the ceiling, I cried.
Of course he did.
Said Holmes.
There's no other way. Now, let's go up through the hole and have a look in the room where the treasure was hidden.
The room was very small. There was no furniture, but a lot of dust. Holmes found a trapdoor that opened onto the roof of the house.
This is how the partner, let's call him number 1, entered. Let's see if he has left any more clues.
Holmes examined the floor. I saw a look of surprise on his face. I looked down. The floor was covered in footprints of a naked foot. They were very clear, but they were half the size of an ordinary footprint. "Holmes," I whispered, "has a child done this terrible thing?"
I was confused for a minute, but it can be explained. There's nothing more to be learned here. Let's go down again.
I asked him what he thought about the small footprints.
Watson, try to think of an answer for yourself. You know how I work. Try it yourself and we can compare results,
he said impatiently. "I can't think of anything," I answered.
It'll become clear soon,
he said.
I want to have a last look at this room now.
He got out his magnifying glass and went carefully around the room, talking to himself. Finally, he stopped.
We won't have any trouble now,
he said.
Number 1 has stepped in the tar. You can see his small footprint here. This container was knocked over and the tar has leaked out.
"And so?" I asked, still confused.
We can find him,
said Holmes.
I know a dog that can follow a smell anywhere, especially one as strong as tar.
We heard some noise. The police had arrived.
Before they get up here,
said Holmes,
just feel the arm of the dead man. What do you think?
I touched the arm of the dead man. The muscles were extremely hard. This is more than the usual rigor mortis. It's from the poison. That's why his face has that strange smile on it.
Exactly,
said Holmes.
The poison from the dart. Now, with all this information, you can begin to understand,
he said. As he was speaking, the police came into the room. One of them was a very fat, red-faced man.
Well, well,
he said, looking at the body.
But who are you?
You must remember me, Mr. Athelney Jones,
said Holmes, quietly.
Of course I do. It's Sherlock Holmes,
he said.
You helped in that case at Bishopsgate, but you must admit it was more luck than your skill.
It was just some very simple reasoning,
said Holmes.
Oh, don't be embarrassed to admit it. How lucky that I was out at Norwood investigating another case. I was at the station when the message arrived. What do you think the man died of?
Oh, this is hardly a case for me to investigate,
replied Holmes dryly.
No, but I can't deny that you sometimes do get it right. So what do you think has happened here, Holmes?
Said Mr. Jones.
Door locked, jewels gone. Ha! I've got it. The brother died in a fit, and Thaddeus Sholto walked off with the treasure. How about that?
And the dead man got up and locked the door from the inside?
Said Holmes.
No, that can't be right.
Mr. Athelney Jones continued talking to himself, looking around the room. He even went up into the room above, which was not easy for a man his size. Eventually, he called to the policeman outside the room.
Ask Mr. Sholto to come in,
he said.
Mr. Sholto, I must tell you that anything you say will be used against you. I'm arresting you for being involved in the death of your brother.
I knew it,
said poor Mr. Sholto.
Don't worry, Mr. Sholto,
said Holmes.
I promise you, I can prove who really killed your brother.
Don't promise too much, Mr. Holmes,
said Athelney Jones.
It might be harder than you think.
Well, Mr. Jones, I'll tell you the name and description of one of the two people who were in this room last night. His name is Jonathan Small. He has a wooden leg. He is middle-aged, sunburnt, and has been in prison. The other man is a rather unusual person. I hope that I will be able to bring them both to justice soon. Let's go, Watson.
Athelney Jones looked shocked. On the stairs, I told Holmes that it was time to take Miss Marston home. He agreed.
When you have taken Miss Marston home, I want you to go to Pinchin Lane,
he said.
The third house on the right belongs to Mr. Sherman. Tell him that I need to borrow Toby. Bring Toby back here in the cab with you.
Toby is a dog? I asked.
Yes, he has the most powerful nose in London,
said Holmes.
While you are away, I'll see what Mrs. Bernstone can tell me.
Chapter 6. Following the Trail.
I took Miss Marston home in the cab. The adventures of this strange night had become too much for her, and she began to cry. She has told me since that she thought I was cold and distant on this night, but I did not want to take advantage of her. She was tired and weak, and she was also rich. How could I tell her I loved her at such a time? It did not seem fair, although it was very difficult not to comfort her as I wanted to. I left her with Mrs. Forrester and continued on my journey. The cab arrived at Pinchin Lane. I knocked at the door. A voice shouted from a window above.
Go away, or I'll let out the dogs.
It's a dog that I want, I began, but I was interrupted again.
Go on. If you don't go away, I'll...
Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I interrupted, and the words had their usual magical effect. In a minute, the door opened, and Mr. Sherman invited me in.
Now, what was it that Mr. Sherlock Holmes wanted, sir?
He wants a dog of yours. Toby, I replied. Toby appeared. He was an ugly dog, brown and white with long hair. He followed me into the cab, and we left. We arrived back at Pondicherry House at about 3 in the morning.
Ah, there's Toby. Good dog,
said Holmes.
Athelney Jones has arrested Thaddeus, the servant, and the housekeeper. So we have the house to ourselves at the moment. Leave Toby there for a minute. I'm going to climb out of that trapdoor and go onto the roof. You go outside and look out for me.
By the time I got out into the area around the house, Holmes was out on the roof.
Is that you, Watson?
He shouted.
Yes. This is the place where he got down. Is there a ladder?
No!
Oh, well, I must be able to climb down this water pipe. Here I come.
He landed on the ground.
There,
he said.
It was easy to see where number 1 had been. There were loose parts on the roof where he walked, and he dropped this.
He held out a small purse. Inside were another 6 or 7 of the poisoned darts.
So, are you ready for a long walk, Watson?
Oh, yes, I replied.
Here you are, doggy. Good boy, Toby. Smell it, Toby. Smell it.
Holmes held out a cloth that he had put in the tar and let Toby sniff it. Holmes then threw the cloth away and led Toby to the water barrel. Toby immediately became very excited and rushed off with his nose to the ground and his tail in the air. It was difficult to keep up with him. It was beginning to get light. Toby led us across the grounds to a place in the wall. It was easy to climb. Holmes went first, and then I passed Toby to him, and he dropped the dog over the other side.
It's lucky for us that it hasn't rained. Toby will be able to follow the tar smell easily,
said Holmes. It seemed to be true. Toby did not hesitate. He just kept his nose to the ground. As we followed him, I asked Holmes how he was so sure about the wooden-legged man.
My dear Watson, it's so simple. 2 soldiers are in charge of a prison. They find out about some secret treasure. An Englishman named Jonathan Small draws a map for them. You remember that name was on Captain Marston's map. Jonathan Small signed it for himself and his friends, the sign of the 4. With the help of this map, the 2 officers, or one of them, Major Sholto, gets the treasure and brings it to England. He didn't do what he was supposed to do for the group of 4. Now, why didn't Jonathan Small and his friends get the treasure themselves? Because they were in prison. They couldn't get to the treasure. So Major Sholto is quite happy with his treasure for some years in England. Then he receives a letter from India which frightens him. What do you think the letter says? It says that the men of the sign of the 4 have been set free, or that they have escaped. So now Major Sholto looks out for a wooden-legged man, a white man because he mistakes a salesman for him and even fires his gun at him. Now, only one white man's name is on the map. The other names are Hindu or Muslim. There is no other white man. So that means that the wooden-legged man is Jonathan Small. Does that make sense?
I agreed that it did.
So, let's pretend we are Jonathan Small. He comes to England with 2 things on his mind. 1, to get his treasure, and 2, having his revenge on Major Sholto. He finds out where Sholto lives, but he doesn't know where the treasure is hidden. Only the Major knows. Small hears that the Major is very ill. He must find out where the treasure is before he dies, so he goes to the window of Major Sholto's room. But he doesn't go in, because the 2 sons are there. He comes back later and searches the room, hoping to find something which will tell him where the treasure is. He finds nothing, but decides to leave the note with the sign of the 4 on it. To him, it's like an act of justice for him and his friends. Now what did Jonathan Small do? He waited until the treasure was discovered, but he needs help because he can't get to the room with his wooden leg.
Number 1, I said. He murdered Bartholomew Sholto.
Yes, and I don't think Jonathan Small was pleased about that. He just wanted to frighten him. There was no need to kill him. But his friend's savage instincts led him to kill Bartholomew Sholto. So Jonathan Small takes the treasure and leaves.
I understood so far. And number 1?
Well, that will become clear soon,
Said Holmes.
Now, where are we?
We had followed Toby to Knight's place. Here, Toby stopped and began running backwards and forwards and around in circles. He looked up at us continuously.
What's the matter with this dog?
Asked Holmes. Suddenly, Toby seemed to find the scent again, and we followed him down another small street. Toby ran down it between 2 piles of wood and stopped by a big container which stood on a cart. The cart was covered in a dark liquid, and the air was full of the smell of tar. Holmes and I looked at each other. Then we both started to laugh.
Listening activity.
I'm sorry, mister.
Watson. My name's Dr. Watson.
I didn't mean to be rude. You see, I thought maybe you were with the police. Sherlock Holmes is all right, you see. I once saw him when he was an amateur boxer. A very good boxer he was, too. It's just that, well, you know, sometimes the people complain about the dogs making too much noise, and they send the police down here. Tell Mr. Holmes he can have Toby for as long as he likes. Toby's a good dog. Mr. Holmes has used him before. He can smell a trail for miles, can my Toby. For miles! And he always finds what he's looking for, he does. Never makes a mistake. I'd bet £1,000 he's the best sniffer dog this side of the river.
Chapter 7. The Baker Street Boys.
What now? I asked. Toby has made a mistake.
There's a lot of tar used in London these days,
Said Holmes.
It's not surprising that he got confused. We'll take him back to the place where he followed the wrong trail.
We walked back to Knight's place. Toby then took us down a street which brought us to the edge of the river.
Well, that's it,
Said Holmes.
They've taken a boat from here.
Nearby was a small house with a sign. It said, Mordecai Smith, boats to hire by the hour or day. Sherlock Holmes walked towards the house. A small boy came running out. He was followed by a large, red-faced woman.
Come back here, Jack!
She shouted. Jack took no notice.
What a lovely little boy,
Said Sherlock Holmes.
a fine child, Mrs. Smith.
He is, sir, but he's difficult to manage, especially when my husband is away.
She said.
Oh, is he away?
Asked Holmes.
I wanted to speak to him.
He's been away since yesterday morning, sir. I'm starting to worry about him. He went away with that wooden-legged man. I don't like him.
A wooden-legged man?
Said Holmes, pretending to be surprised.
Yes. He came late last night and woke my husband up. I heard his wooden leg clicking on the road. They left in the steamboat.
I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Smith, because I wanted to hire a steamboat. Is it that old green and yellow boat I've seen here? Let me think. What was it called?
Oh, no, sir. The Aurora has just been painted. It's black with 2 red stripes now.
Thanks. Well, I hope you hear from your husband, Mrs. Smith. I'm going down the river. If I see him, I'll tell him you're worried about him. Ah, look. Here's a small boat for hire. Let's go across to the other side of the river, Watson. Goodbye, Mrs. Smith.
On our way across the river, we decided what to do next. So, are we going to search for the Aurora? I asked.
No,
Said Holmes.
that will take far too long.
Well, what do we do then? I asked.
We'll go home, have some breakfast, and get some rest. We'll stop at the post office. I want to send a telegram to Wiggins. Do you remember how the street boys helped in the Jefferson Hope case?
We returned to Baker Street. I felt much better after a bath and some breakfast. We were reading the report of the case in the newspaper when the street boys arrived.
Got your message, sir?
Said Wiggins.
Right, Wiggins. Here's a coin for each of you. I want you to find a steamboat called the Aurora, owned by a Mordecai Smith, black with 2 red stripes. It's on the river somewhere. Let me know as soon as you have any news. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Said Wiggins.
Very well. You can go now.
He said. The boys left. Are you going to sleep, Holmes? I asked him.
No,
He replied.
I want to think over this curious case. Wooden-legged men are not common, and the other man must be unique.
Yes, what about this other man, number 1?
You must have your own thoughts, Watson. Small footprints, naked feet, poison darts. What do you think?
An Indian, I exclaimed. One of the Indians who were the friends of Jonathan Small.
I did consider that,
Said Holmes.
but no. Look at this.
He turned the pages of a book.
Here we are. The Andaman Islands. 340 miles to the north of Sumatra, in the Bay of Bengal. The Aborigines of the Andaman Islands are perhaps the smallest people on earth. The average height is below 4 feet. Their feet and hands are very small. They are a very fierce group of people and fight using poisoned darts. They often eat their victims. What nice friendly people, Watson.
But how did Jonathan Small and this Aborigine become friends? I asked.
I don't know, Watson. Jonathan Small was on the Andaman Islands, so he probably made friends with an islander. Anyway, Watson, you look tired. Why don't you go to sleep?
I did as he suggested. Soon I was dreaming about the sweet face of Miss Mary Marston. I woke up late in the afternoon, feeling much better. Sherlock Holmes was reading a book. Have you heard anything? I asked.
No.
He answered. He sounded disappointed.
I expected to know something by now. Wiggins was here while you were asleep. He says they can't find the boat.
Is there anything I can do? I asked.
No.
He replied.
We just have to wait. You do what you want. I'll wait here.
Then I'll go over and see Mrs. Cecil Forrester,
Mrs. Cecil Forrester?
said Holmes, smiling. Well, of course, to see Miss Marston as well. They were anxious to hear what happened. I'll be back in an hour or two.
Well, if you're going across the river, you can take Toby back. I don't think we'll need him again.
I took Toby back to Pinchin Lane and went to see Miss Marston. The two women were very interested to hear what had happened.
Just think, Mary,
Said Mrs. Forrester.
if the search is successful, you'll be a rich woman. Chapter 8. Chasing the Aurora.
It was dark when I returned to Baker Street. Sherlock Holmes had gone to his room. All night I heard him walking up and down. The next morning at breakfast, he looked tired.
I can't sleep,
He said.
We are so close to solving this mystery, but the boat can't be found.
We heard nothing all that day either. Early the next morning, I woke up and was surprised to see Sherlock Holmes standing by my bed. He was dressed as a sailor, with a jacket and a red scarf around his neck.
I'm going to the river, Watson. I've been thinking, and there's one thing left to try.
Can I come with you? I asked.
No,
He replied.
I want you to stay here. Wiggins may come with news. If any notes or telegrams arrive, then open them and do what you think is best.
He left. It was a long day. No news came. I tried to read, but could not concentrate. I wondered if, for the first time, Holmes had got it all wrong. At about 3 o'clock, Athelney Jones came to the house. He had received a telegram from Holmes telling him to go to Baker Street. We heard someone coming slowly up the stairs. An old man in sailor clothes came in. He had thick white eyebrows and a long grey beard. "Can I help you?" I asked him.
Is Mr. Sherlock Holmes here?
He asked. I told the old man that he was out. "But you can give any messages to me," I said.
No, I have to tell Sherlock Holmes.
Said the old man. "Well, you must wait for him then. Is it about Mordecai Smith's boat?" I asked. The old man said that it was, and that he knew all about the treasure as well. He did not want to wait, but Mr. Athelney Jones told him that he had to. The old man sat down, and we continued with our conversation and our cigars. After a few moments, we heard Sherlock Holmes's voice.
Is there a cigar for me too?
He said. We both jumped. "Holmes!" I said. "But where is the old man?"
Here is the old man.
He said, holding out some white hair.
I thought my disguise was pretty good, but not that good.
He laughed.
I have been working like this all day. How are you, Mr. Jones?
He asked. Athelney Jones shook his head.
Not good. I had to release 2 of my suspects.
Don't worry.
Said Holmes.
If you do as I say, we'll have 2 more prisoners for you. You can take all the credit, but you must do as I say.
Athelney Jones agreed.
I'll need a fast police boat to be at Westminster at 7 o'clock, and 2 strong men.
Said Holmes.
When we catch the men, we'll get the treasure. I'm sure Watson here wants to take the box around to Miss Marston. Half of it is hers, after all. I want an unofficial interview with Jonathan Small. And you must stay for dinner, Mr. Jones.
Soon it was time to go. Holmes told me to take my pistol. We arrived at the river at Westminster, and our boat was waiting for us. Holmes told the police to stop opposite Jacobson's yard. On the way, he told me what had happened.
Watson, I have been thinking. Jonathan Small and his friend from the Andaman Islands are very noticeable, so they do everything by night. They pay Mordecai Smith well to keep the Aurora ready for them. Then they wait a night or two. Then, when they think it's safe, they take the boat to Gravesend, where they probably have tickets on a ship for America. That's what they're going to do tonight.
But what about the Aurora? I asked. Why hasn't it been found? It's not easy to hide a boat.
No,
agreed Holmes.
That's why we're going to Jacobson's yard. The men have taken the boat to a boat builder and told them to make a small repair. The boat is now hidden inside one of their buildings. I asked at several boat builders until I found the Aurora at Jacobson's. The man told me that there was nothing wrong with the boat. I was there when Mordecai Smith arrived. He was drunk. He told the man that he wanted the Aurora at 8 o'clock tonight. So I've left one of the street boys watching the boat. We'll wait out in the water on our police boat, and I'll be surprised if we don't get the boat, the two men, and the treasure this evening.
It was dark when we arrived at the yard. We waited out in the water.
"There's the Aurora!"
shouted Holmes suddenly.
"It's going very fast. Come on, follow that boat."
I think they're going too fast,
said Athelney Jones.
I don't think we can catch them.
"We must catch them,"
said Holmes.
"Come on."
Slowly we came closer to the Aurora. We were getting closer and closer when a large boat pulling three smaller ones came between us and the Aurora. By the time we had gone around them, the Aurora was further ahead, but we continued as fast as we could. Athelney Jones put our searchlight on the Aurora. Now they knew we were following them. Athelney Jones shouted at them to stop. The man in the back of the Aurora stood up and made an angry gesture in our direction. He was a tall, powerful man, and I saw that he had a wooden leg. Next to him, a small man stood up, the smallest man I have ever seen. Holmes already had his gun out, and I took out my pistol.
"If he raises his hand, fire,"
said Holmes quietly. Our boat was now next to theirs. We saw the tiny man take out a short, round piece of wood and put it to his lips. Holmes and I fired together. The small man threw his hands up and fell into the river. The other man turned the Aurora suddenly and went towards the bank. It was a very muddy area. The Aurora hit the bank, and the wooden-legged man tried to climb onto the land. But his wooden leg immediately sank in the mud. He could not go forward or backward. He was stuck. We pulled him out of the mud and onto our boat. Mordecai Smith also came on board our boat. Seconda. Mordecai Smith also came on board our boat. On the Aurora there was a heavy iron chest. It was the treasure. We took it onto our boat and tied the Aurora behind us. We went slowly up the river again. We moved our lights over the river, looking for the man from the Andaman Islands. But there was no sign of him.
"Look,"
said Holmes.
"We were only just quick enough with our pistols."
I looked. Behind us was a poisoned dart, stuck in the wood of our boat.
Listening activity. 1. I never walk anywhere. I only ever go by car. I live a long way from the centre. There are only 3 buses a day, and the last one is at 6 in the evening. I couldn't go to work if I didn't have my car. 2.
I work in the centre of London and I live near an underground station. It's not the most comfortable way of travelling and it's often crowded, but I can get to most places in the centre in less than 20 minutes.
3.
I love travelling by boat. It's so relaxing. I think if I could, I would buy a houseboat.
4. I think the most uncomfortable journey of my life was on the back of a camel. I spent 3 days trekking in the Sahara, and the camel kept stopping. It was terrible. 5.
I prefer to travel by train when I can. I much prefer them to planes. I know it's quicker to get places, but by the time you queue up at the airport, it can be just as long. On the train I can relax, read my book, and arrive in the centre of the city.
Chapter 9. The Sign of the Four.
Jonathan Small now sat in our boat with us.
I'm sorry that it has come to this,
said Sherlock Holmes.
So am I.
He said.
I promise you I never hurt Mr. Sholto. It was that little madman Tonga who shot one of his darts into him.
Have a cigar,
said Holmes.
You are going to come up to my rooms and tell me everything. I think I can help you. I think I can prove that the poison acts so quickly that Bartholomew Sholto was dead before you even entered the room.
He was, sir. I was ready to kill Tonga for what he did, but he ran off. This treasure has brought nothing but trouble to anyone who has ever owned it.
Athelney Jones returned from questioning Mordecai Smith.
He says he knew nothing about the Norwood murder,
he said. Our prisoner agreed.
No, we told him nothing. We just paid him a lot of money for the use of his boat. He was to get more money if we arrived at our ship at Gravesend. It was going to Brazil.
Dr. Watson, we'll take you to Vauxhall Bridge. You take the treasure back to Baker Street. Where is the key?
He asked Jonathan Small.
At the bottom of the river,
he replied. I landed in Vauxhall and took a cab. A policeman came with me. We stopped at Mrs. Cecil Forrester's house first. Miss Marston was there alone. I went in with the box and put it on the table. Miss Marston looked at the iron box.
Is that the treasure, then?
She asked. Yes, this is the Agra treasure. Half of it is yours, and half is Thaddeus Sholto's. You'll have a couple of 100,000 each. Just think of that. You'll be one of the richest young ladies in England.
If I am, it is because of you,
she said simply. Not me. Sherlock Holmes, I said.
Tell me all about it, Dr. Watson,
she asked. She went white when I told her about the poisoned dart. It's all over. There is the treasure.
It's a beautiful box,
she said. I managed to force open the box. I threw back the lid. We both looked in amazement. The box was empty.
The treasure is lost,
said Miss Marston calmly. I listened to her words and suddenly realized what they meant. Now there was no barrier between myself and Miss Marston. Thank God! I cried. She looked at me.
Why do you say that?
She asked. Because now I can tell you how I feel, I said, taking her hand. I love you, Mary. The treasure stopped me from speaking, but now it has gone. I can tell you I love you. That's why I said, thank God. She did not take her hand from mine.
Then I say, thank God too,
she said. One treasure was lost, but I had found another. When I got to Baker Street, I showed them the empty box. Athelney Jones was very angry.
You did this, Small,
he said.
Yes, I did,
said Jonathan Small.
It's my treasure, and if I can't have it, then no one else can. No one has any right to it except 3 men who are in prison in the Andaman Islands, and myself. It belongs to the Sign of the Four.
We have not heard your story,
said Holmes.
We don't know if justice is on your side or not. Perhaps you can tell us.
So, Jonathan Small told us his side of the story.
When I was 18, I joined the army and was sent to India. I went swimming in the Ganges. A crocodile took my right leg just above the knee. I was in hospital for 5 months and came out with this wooden leg. I was only 20 and I could no longer be in the army. But I found work on a plantation. I was still able to ride a horse and I watched over the plantation and its workers for Mr. Abel White. I was happy to spend the rest of my life there. But then came the Great Mutiny. The plantation was burned and I had to escape. I went to Agra. There was a group of British people there. We moved into the old fort at Agra. The fort is an enormous building with many passages and doors. I guarded one of the doors with 2 other men, 2 Sikhs called Mahomet Singh and Abdullah Khan. One night they suddenly took my gun and put a knife to my throat. "Listen to me," said one of them. "You are either with us or you die. Do you understand?" I did not have much choice, so I agreed. Then they told me about the treasure. They said that it was to be divided 4 ways, among us 3 and another man called Dost Akbar. We made a promise to each other. Then they told me about a rich man who put his most valuable jewels in an iron box. He gave it to a servant to bring to the fort of Agra to be kept safe until the fighting was over. The servant is disguised as a merchant and calls himself Achmet, they said. He's in Agra now and is trying to find a way into the fort. Dost Akbar is with him, and he is going to bring him to this door tonight. No one else knows he's coming, only us 4. We will kill Ahmed and divide the treasure between us.
Chapter 10. The Story of the Wooden-Legged Man.
Jonathan Small continued his story.
I was surrounded by death and killing every day, so the death of Ahmed didn't mean much to me. I promised the 2 other men that I was with them. Ahmed and Dost Akbar arrived. The 3 Sikhs took Ahmed away with them. I heard a fight, and then Ahmed escaped. He came running back past me with the others chasing him. I put out my foot to make him fall, and Dost Akbar killed him.
Jonathan Small stopped for a moment. We all looked disgusted.
"Well, if you were in my place, you might have done the same,"
he said defiantly.
Go on with the story,
said Holmes.
We buried the body and then opened the box with the treasure inside. There were a lot of beautiful gems inside. Diamonds, rubies, emeralds, pearls. We counted them all and then put them back in the box. We decided to hide the box until we could leave the fort safely. I drew 4 maps, one for each of us, to show where the treasure was. I put the sign of the 4 at the bottom. We promised that each of us should act for all 4 of us, never just for himself. Soon it seemed that peace was coming once again to India, and we hoped that soon we could share the treasure and escape safely. But we were arrested for the murder of Ahmed. We were put in prison for life. The treasure stayed where it was. We were moved to the Andaman Islands. I was treated very well there. All the time I was thinking of ways to escape and return to Agra, but I was hundreds of miles away from any other land. It was difficult. Often I watched the soldiers and the prison officers playing cards in the evenings. There was Major Sholto, Captain Marston and some others. The soldiers always lost. Major Sholto was the worst. Soon he had lost all his money and was drinking a lot. I saw my chance. One night I asked him what was the right thing to do with the hidden treasure. I told him it was worth $500,000. His eyes lit up. He spoke to Captain Marston. He said that perhaps they could help. We made a deal. They helped me and my 3 friends to freedom, and they got a 5th share of the treasure. Major Sholto didn't think this was much, although it was 50,000 for each of them. We had a second meeting with Mahomet Singh, Abdullah Khan and Dost Akbar. We came to an agreement. I made them 2 maps of the fort to show where the treasure was hidden. Major Sholto would go to Agra to check that the box was there. He would leave it there and arrange for a small boat to come to the islands for me and my 3 friends. We would then go to Agra in the boat and Major Sholto would return to the island. Then Captain Marston would meet us in Agra and then divide the treasure. Captain Marston would take the Major's share to him. The sign of the 4 was on each map. We waited. Major Sholto went to India but never came back. We found out that his uncle had died and left him a lot of money. He had also taken our treasure. Captain Marston went to Agra, but it was gone. From then on, I thought only of revenge. It became more important than the treasure itself. Sometime after, I helped one of the Andaman Islanders when he was ill. When he was better, he wanted to stay with me. I learned to speak a little of his language. Tonga, that was his name, had a large canoe. He helped me to escape from the island. We travelled around the world for a while, my small friend and I. Eventually, we arrived in England. I found out where Sholto lived, and I soon found out that he still had the jewels. When I heard that he was dying, I went over to the house. I saw him with his 2 sons, but I knew I was too late. He was already dead. I went back later to search for some clue about the treasure, but there was nothing. I left a note saying, "The sign of the 4." We made some money at this time by showing Tonga at fairs and circuses. The world's smallest man, or the cannibal. We made enough to live and eat. Then I heard that the sons had found the treasure. I knew that with Tonga's help we could get it. Unfortunately, Bartholomew Sholto was still in the room when we went to get the treasure. Tonga thought he had done something very clever by killing him, so he was very surprised when I was so angry. And the rest of the story you already know.
A remarkable story,
said Holmes.
I think it's time to take our storyteller away,
said Athelney Jones.
The cab is waiting. Thank you both for your help. Good night. Good night, gentlemen,
said Jonathan Small. We sat smoking in silence for a while after they left. I'm afraid that may be the last investigation I can help with, Holmes, I said finally. Miss Marston has accepted my offer of marriage. Sherlock Holmes groaned. What's wrong? I asked.
Nothing,
he said.
She is a charming young lady, but love is an emotional thing, and emotion is the opposite of reason, which I value above everything else.
Holmes looked tired. It seems rather unfair, I said. You have done all the work in this business. I get a wife out of it. Jones takes all the credit, and what do you get?
For me,
said Sherlock Holmes,
there is always the next case.